Sri Lanka's economic pivot away from tourism towards maritime trade is not a story about development strategy in the benign technocratic sense. It is a story about survival, leverage, and the brutal hierarchy of global system. For decades, Sri Lanka sold an image of itself as the pearl of the Indian Ocean, a place of beaches, wildlife, culture, and spiritual calm. And that image worked till it didn't. Tourism, by its very nature, is an economy of permission. It functions only as long as foreigners feel safe, currencies remain stable, and borders stay open. Global shocks remain distant. Sri Lanka learned violently that none of these conditions are permanent. The Easter bombings of 2019 demonstrated how a single security breach could annihilate an entire revenue stream overnight. COVID revealed that tourism dependent economies have no insulation against systematic shocks. The fertilizer ban of 2021, inflation peaking at 70% in 2022, and the eventual sovereign default exposed a deeper truth. An economy built on consumption by outsiders cannot sustain sovereignty when crises converge. What followed, mass protests, the resignation of the president, and the IMF intervention, was not merely an economic reset but a geopolitical awakening. Sri Lanka realized that beauty is optional in the global order, but location is destiny. Geography is one asset no creator can repossess, and Sri Lanka sits astride one of the most valuable maritime corridors on earth. The Indian Ocean is not simply a body of water, it is the central artery of global trade connecting the Middle East, Africa, and East Asia. Energy flows, container shipping, and military logistics all pass through or near Sri Lankan waters. This fact transforms ports from infrastructure into instruments of power. The rapid expansion of activity at the port of Colombo, amplified by global shipping disruptions, as the Red Sea crisis demonstrates how external shocks can suddenly elevate peripheral states into logistical hubs. Yet ports are not neutral assets. They are magnets for greater power competition, and Sri Lanka has become a contested space precisely because of its strategic irrelevance turning into relevance. China's 99-year lease of Hambantota port was not simply a debt equity swap. It was a signal event in the global structure over sea lanes. India's counter investments in Colombo are not altruistic development assistance, they are defensive moves against encirclement. The United States announcement of a $500 million terminal project, coupled with the specter of punitive tariffs, and illustrates how economic tools are now openly used as coercive instruments to extract strategic assets. Sri Lanka is not being quoted, it is being positioned. This is where the danger emerges. Infrastructure investment can stabilize an economy while simultaneously hollowing out autonomy. Ports generate revenue, but they also lock states into dependency structures if control over operations, security, and financing shifts outward. A country that merely hosts global trade without commanding it becomes a located service station, useful, profitable, and dispensable. The Hambantota lease stands as a warning of how desperation converts geography into leverage for others rather than the state itself. In this context, the Sri Lanka's challenge is not growth but governance. How to extract value from global interest without surrendering decision making power. This is a far more complex task than rebuilding tourism because it requires institutional strength, strategic coherence, and long term discipline, qualities that are scarce in post crisis states. The article's most significant insight lies not in ports but in surrounding waters. Sri Lanka's exclusive economic zone represents a vastly underutilized reservoir of sovereign potential. Unlike ports, which primarily facilitate the movement of other people's goods, the blue economy offers the possibility of endogenous power creation. Fisheries, offshore energy, marine biotech, and ocean based pharmaceuticals are not merely revenue streams. They are capacity building sectors. They demand skilled labor, scientific research, regulatory competence, and environmental stewardship. Countries that dominate these sectors do not simply earn rents, they embed themselves into global value chains as producers rather than conduits. This distinction is critical. Ports are transactional, blue economy industries are transformational. They allow a state to convert geography into knowledge, empowerment, employment, and strategic insulation. However, this potential exists alongside mounting constraints. Poverty doubling since 2021 and persistent youth unemployment threaten social cohesion. Maritime insecurity from piracy to illegal fishing exposes the limit of current surveillance and enforcement capacity. Environmental degradation risks turning short-term port expansion into long-term ecological loss, undermining fisheries, coastal livelihoods, and regional competitions, such as Malaysia, are already moving ahead in AI-driven port logistics, indicating that efficiency, not just location, will determine future relevance. Geography can open the door, but competence determines who stays inside. Ultimately, Sri Lanka's pivot is a microcosm of a broader geopolitical reality. In the contemporary international system, power accrues not to those who are admired, but to those who are indispensable. Tourism markets charm, maritime logistics command. The transition from a tourism led economy to a trade centric, ocean focused strategy reflects an attempt to move up the hierarchy of relevance. From a destination to a node, from an experience to a function. Yet this transition carries a stark binary outcome. Either Sri Lanka learns to balance external powers while building internal capacity, or it becomes an arena where stronger actors negotiate access over its head. The difference between those outcomes will not be decided by investment volumes, but by strategic intent. In the final analysis, Sri Lanka's future will be shaped by whether it treats its ports as ends or as means. If ports become the destination, the country risks permanent subordination, wealth without power, growth without control. If ports are used as cash engines to finance a broader maritime industrial base, the island can transform crisis into structural advantage. The lesson is unforgiving but universal. In a world governed by flows of goods, energy, capital, and data, states that control the choke points matter. States that merely host them do not. Sri Lanka has been handed a great geopolitical opening. Whether it becomes a broker of power or a pawn within it will determine whether its pivot is remembered as renewal or as another missed moment in the long history of strategically located but strategically constrained nations.